Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, wherever you are. Welcome to this panel about Jaguars. This is the second session of the power of the Jaguar. Yesterday, we had a very rich panel with very interesting speakers. Today, we have, again, a very interesting, diverse group to talk about the Jaguar. My name is Liliana Jauregui, and together with Lucia Guaita, work for IUCN in the Netherlands, and we are convening this session. IUCN is the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. This is the Dutch committee, and we convened this panel as part of the project Operation Jaguar. And this project is dedicated to combat wildlife trafficking in jaguars and jaguar parts. I want to remind you that this session is going to be recorded. The session is also translated into Spanish. And to change to the Spanish interpretation, click on the globe icon at the bottom of the Zoom screen and select Spanish. La sesión está traducida en español. Para escuchar la interpretación en español, haga clic en el icono del globo en la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom y seleccione español. Jaguars are the largest feline of the American continent and a valuable symbol for many indigenous cultures. However, jaguars are increasingly endangered and primarily due to habitat loss, human-wildlife conflicts, and wildlife trade as a new threats. We learned with Operation Jaguar that we need more than conventional conservation efforts to protect jaguars. We need also to acknowledge the importance of local and indigenous views to use this knowledge in our strategies, conservation strategies, because indigenous territories overlap with important jaguar territories. So we hope this panel is going to support any actor working in the field of nature conservation. And I wish you a very inspiring session. Lucia?
So hi, everyone. So I would just like to remind to the audience that if you have any questions, please post them in the Zoom chat. And well, I'd like to introduce the discussant for today's session. So his name is Anthony Cummings, and Anthony is a native of Guyana in South America. He's a geographer and a conservationist who focuses his research on his own home country. And Anthony's work seeks to understand how global economic processes influence human-wildlife interactions and environmental change within Sweden landscapes. And Anthony is actively working to develop tools and strategies for responding to this human-wildlife conflict situation and understanding the land use and the land cover realities that influence the presence and density of wildlife. Anthony has been on the faculty of the School of Economic, Political, and Policy Science at the University of Texas at Dallas since 2013. And now I'd like to give the floor to Anthony, please.
Thank you, Lucia. Greetings, good afternoon, good morning, and good day, wherever you are. Hopefully one of those apply to you. I'm incredibly excited today to introduce our panelists. As Liliana noted, this panel is a continuation of our discussion around the power of the jaguar that began yesterday. I want to thank our colleagues who presented yesterday. Together, they provided us with a sense of the state of the field on humans and our understanding and interactions with the America's largest cat species. Yesterday, my colleague, Dr. Silvia Marcheni, captured in a succinct way the various axes along which the work of our panelists are aligned. Our colleagues are invested in jaguar conservation, anthropological research, in a more broad sense, academic research, and also trying to understand change processes and how these may impact jaguars. Today's panelists are going to continue along these lines of thought. Our panelists are engaged in knowledge creation and exploration that will help us to better understand the status of the jaguar and how we need to act from an academic perspective, outreach, and activism in order to protect the America's largest cat species. We have 4 presenters today. working on understanding the jaguars and the role they play in the lives of indigenous peoples through anthropological research, as I noted, filmmaking, and more broadly, biological research. I will introduce the panelists now in turn as they will speak, so in order in which they will speak. And when I'm done introducing them, Dr. Barbara Risi will start our session rolling today. Dr. Risi is a lecturer at VU Universidad in Amsterdam, and also at Amsterdam University College, where she teaches in the areas of anthropology and sustainability. At the moment, she researches the Dutch people and their waste. She is licensed from her teaching position in Universidad Federal de la Integración Latinoamericana in Brazil. And she holds a PhD in social anthropology from Universidad Federal de Santa Catarina in Brazil, with internship at Oxford University. She is a columnist for the Amazon Real independent journalist site and co-author of the books Gay Indians in Brazil, published in 2017, and Queer Natives in Latin America, published in 2021. Both of these were published by Springer. Our second panelist, and I just discovered that we have so much in common, is Dr. Lewis Daly. He's a lecturer in social anthropology and environment, University College London. He holds a doctorate from Oxford University. So he went to the Auto Blue. I went to Cambridge, so he's from Oxford. In 2015, which concerned indigenous archaeological knowledge and practices among the Makushi people of Northern Amazonia. He's conducted research over 2 years in ethnographic fieldwork with the Makushi peoples in Southern Guyana, focusing primarily on interspecies engagements in the indigenous culture and cosmology. His research is framed by an appraisal of the impact of conservation and sustainable development interventions on Makushi lifeways, livelihoods, and environmental practices. Throughout his work, Lewis is particularly interested in advancing a dedicated anthropology of plants. And he's also the founder and co-editor of Tea, the Ethnobotanical Assembly, an open access online journal about people-plant relationships. Our third panelist, who is not present today, but will present via video, is Simon Gonzalez, and he's a director of photography who graduated from Sydney University in Australia. He has more than 20 years of experience telling stories. He dedicated the last 10 years of his life living with different indigenous communities of Colombia, understanding the relationship and the importance of the jaguar in our lives. And our final speaker, who will wrap up our panel today, is Vanessa Cardoso. Vanessa obtained her degree in environmental and conservation biology at the Institute for Graduate Studies and Research. Her thesis research was focused on monitoring the population status of jaguars in Brownsburg National Park. Vanessa is currently employed at the National Zoological Collections of Suriname at the Entomology Department, and she also plays a role as a lecturer at the Anton de Kom University in Suriname. She teaches biodiversity and monitoring, and she's also the secretary and researcher at Neo Wild. Her passion lies in fieldwork and nature photography. I'm incredibly excited to listen to these talks today, and without delay, I'm going to hand you over to Barbara.
I will unmute myself. I hope you can hear me. Wow, how beautiful the image of the jaguar looking at us. So my name is Barbara Arizi. I work for the Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, the Free University of Amsterdam. As Anthony said, I'm also teaching in the Amsterdam University College. And today I'm going to present some of my work. I carry out field work with the Matias indigenous people since 2003. We know each other, and since 2006, I worked there in the Terra Indígena Vale do Javari. Now I live in the Netherlands, and we keep in contact via WhatsApp and internet. So almost every week I talk to someone there, knowing what's going on, especially that we are still trying to prepare to deal with the pandemic there in the Amazon. So we keep on close touch, even though far away, so close, so far, as the title of the book about Lévi-Strauss. So today I'm going to present about the Matisse people and their Jaguar dots. I would like to go to the next slide, please. The Matisse are very internationally known because a lot of interest was raised by the media. So they've been on the cover of National Geographic twice. This is one of the covers in 2003, but they've been twice. Here we see T.P. Matisse, one of the important shamans who died after his second snake bite. And here we see one of the herborists, specialist in herbs, showing a cup with Bruce Perry. That is a filmmaker from UK that made a series called Tribe. And one of the tribes he depicted was the Matisse. And I worked on this objectification of their culture. I'm speaking a bit slower for our dear interpreter. So I would like to go to the next slide. The Matisse and the filmmakers, have a big relationship because the Matisse were living in a kind of voluntary isolation. They were avoiding contact with the outside world until 1976, 78. But since they established contact with the Brazilians, employees and the government, they entered a whirlpool of contact and of attention. Everybody wanted to film them. So Jacques Cousteau had been there in 1982, just after their contact. And since then, they became known in the media as the Jaguar people. They don't like this nomination, they avoid it, but they do have a lot in common with the Jaguars, but not just the Jaguars. So I would like to go on to the next slide. Here, for example, we see them sitting with other journalists from NBC. They are like called the BBC of Asia. It's a very known South Korean television film that was called The Tears of the Amazon. And one of the series was depicting also the Matisse. We can go on. And I wrote my thesis about those Neishtanek. They are like performances of myth, where they tell the myth in all its grandeur, like an opera. They enact the animals. And here we see the teacher showing a frog, telling a myth about a frog. And today I'm going to talk, one of the Jaguar dots is a myth about the Bacurau bird. So I would like to tell the myth, and we can go on to the next slide. Those are the Matisse. I wrote a lot about those performances in this paper published in 2016. We can go on. I will give you some intro as well about where they are, and then I will tell the myth. Here is the Vale do Javari. On the upper map, you see where it is located in South America. It's on the border of Peru, Colombia, and Brazil, especially very close to Peru. It's the second biggest indigenous land in Brazil. If you go around by bike, it's 2,000 kilometers, or the circumference is 2,000 kilometers. Can go on. So as I said, they contacted the Brazilian government in 1976, 78. There were around 300 people living in 5 villages. In 1983, they were reduced due to sickness, like a very traumatized contact it was. And they lived then in one kind of survivor camp. They were between 87 and 60 people just. And then nowadays they are again recovering their population. They are around 350 people living in 3 communities. Can go on. And yeah, they are these splendorous hunters. And I would like to go to the next slide to tell the myth, where we have like a myth around the fire at night. And those are the beri-beri. It's the indigenous, the Matisse word for the dots. And here is an elder showing me the Jaguar kind of design, but he's showing me a kind of people, the Ayakobo and the Tsasibo. The Tsasibo is the image of the big hunter, the guys who are like the hunters. So they are very close to the Jaguars. And when the Matis want to refer to their own culture, they say, Nukumbarubur-kit, our dots things, so our Jaguar things. And I will tell you the myth of the Bacurau, the small bird who stole the fire from the Jaguar. So the Jaguar had a fire, as Lévi-Strauss talks in his famous book, the first of the Mythologique, Le Cru et le Cuit. The Jaguar for the Matis had a fire, but it was not stolen by the Matis, but by the Bacurau. The Bacurau took the fire and ran away, and the Jaguar went after the Bacurau. And then start running, and the Bacurau, to escape, went to the middle of the lake. And in the middle of the lake, he was there flying, holding the fire, trying not to burn his feathers. And in a certain moment, he couldn't stand it anymore, plop, dropped the fire. And there he lost the fire, but so did the Jaguar. And after that, the Jaguar didn't know how to eat. So the Jaguar went around, looking how he could eat raw. And finally, he saw the Matis. We can go to the next slide. And the Matis were painted with urucum, as he is now here. And the Bacurau didn't eat cooked anymore. But the Jaguar was wondering, how can I eat raw? He saw the Matis. Can go to the next slide. And the Matis were all painted in red, like Chema in this picture, painted with urucum. And then the Jaguar thought, oh, they are raw, so I can also eat raw. And then he started eating slowly, each time a little bit of, and then he didn't vomit, and he could keep this raw meat inside of him, of her. And then the Jaguar learned how to eat raw. Now I'll go to the next slide and to another dot, and that's about body painting. And me and my supervisor, Calavia Sais, we wrote this paper talking about the rituals as laboratory for new relationships, not to talk just about the myth and the past or this time when the animals used to talk. Like Lévi-Strauss said, the myth is the time where the animals could also talk or also talked. And here we see the dots in the body painting preparing this man, Binan Mante, to be the center, the center head of this longhouse they've just built. You can go to the next slide. Here we see that he's totally painted by his sister. And here we see under some women painting themselves with another pattern. That's the one that the frog has here under his throat, on his throat. So we can go on about the other dots. One other dot is the story of this young man. We see the picture. He is called Binan and Chapu da Onça. Chapu is his name. Da Onça means from the Jaguar, because when he was 12 years old, they were opening up a crop to plant manioc and banana. And then he forgot his clothes. He went there to pick it up alone. People were waiting in the canoe for him. And then he was attacked by a jaguar, not very big jaguar. And that's why he survived. The jaguar just got his nails on his head and on his arm. And that was the beginning then of his life as an apprentice to become a shaman. And here we see some of his drawings where he's studying, and he dedicates a lot of his time making drawings of his images and things he sees. And here on the right side, we see his copying also my master thesis by hand. He copied it, everything. It's his way of studying to become a shaman. Can go on. And here we see the young ones dressed in a human hunter's dance. Oh, sorry, I put hunters with TH. And it's part of the Neush Tanek, the performance of the myth. And here they are showing they're proud of being hunters with arrows, bows, blowpipes, but now they also use 16 millimeter. We can go on. And finally, to the next slide, I'm going to show some of the material culture and some of the elders where we can see they using their bracelets. On the left side, the man in the red shorts is the herborist, and he is with his whole adornment, except the kind of jaguar fangs that the Matiz has, but that we see on the man dressed in blue. That's Tumit Preto, he is deceased. And those bracelets, I'm gonna talk about them in the next slide, please. How do they also have, painted here with urucum, they have this enactment of predator, like the jaguar, but also like prey, like the queixada, the wild pig, the peccary. And here we see them with the adornment of that Philippe Erickson calls the jaguar fangs, but also painted with urucum, like the raw meat for the jaguar. Can go on. And here they are dressed as peccary, as the wild pigs, ready to enter the longhouse. You can see next slide how they are also connected. Yeah, always in this line between the material culture, resembling the jaguar with the adornment and with the bracelets. And here we see how the dot, the jaguar black spot of his or her skin is depicted and copied by the Matiz, how they try to interweave their relation with the jaguar also in their material culture. And with that, I think I'm almost killing my 15 minutes. We can go to the next slides. Here we see the Matiz in a picture that belongs now to the archive of the Royal Anthropological Institute. I participated there once as a photographer, and this picture was the first prize. They are here showing their beauty dressed like the big rodent. They are dressed and they are in the water after playing one of those Neish Tanek, those rituals. And we can also then go to the next slide. Here is some of those pictures, like Clifford Geertz says, I've been there, but it's showing also the Matiz in their task of teaching the anthropologists how to prepare monkeys to cook. They are basically hunters of jaguars, not, but of monkeys and arboreal animals. And the jaguar, they usually never kill the jaguar because that's the top predator and it's the animal that is the hunter, is the top hunter. They just killed the jaguar that attacked the young boy I showed before, because after one jaguar attacks someone, then they go hunting after the jaguar. But that's the only occasion that the Matiz would do so. And then we can go to my last slide to say thank you. And that's my email. You can check some of my theses, my articles. They are all open source. And the ones who are not from Springer, you can find them in pirate sites. So I give the word back to Anthony. And thank you very much for inviting. Thank you very much, Liliana and Lucia, for all the work, and all the people from IUCN. You guys do a very good job. I'm very curious to listen to my other colleagues. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Barbara. That was so engaging. And storytelling has such an important role to play, especially within indigenous peoples' landscapes and Swidden landscapes in particular, because these stories point to the importance of the animals. And oftentimes, because indigenous peoples are so in tune and in harmony with the animals around them, that protecting them through storytelling is importantly a part of their way of life. So now we'll continue this tradition of storytelling, and we'll go from the Métis in Barbara's case, and now we'll go to the Mukushi in Guyana. So over to Louis.
Thank you, Anthony. So if we could go to the next slide, that's great, thank you. title of my talk is The Roar of the Tapir Tiger, Cosmos and Conservation in Amazonian Guyana. Next slide, please. Hello, I am Lewis Daly. I'm a social anthropologist and ethnobotanist, and my research centers on ethno-ecological engagements in indigenous Amazonian life worlds. The research I'm presenting today is the product of an ongoing collaboration with two Makushi communities in Guyana, that is Yupukari and Rewa, with whom I've been working since 2011. Here, we see a rather beautiful photograph of a jaguar in the remote headwaters of the Rewa River in Guyana, taken by my friend Ashley Holland, a resident of the Rupununi and an experienced ecotourism guide. In this short presentation, I will explore the interface between scientific conservation, including ecotourism, and indigenous knowledge and practices relating to jaguars. In doing so, I will foreground Makushi jaguar concepts and relations, including jaguar transformation in shamanism. Next slide, please. The heavily forested country of Guyana is roughly equivalent in size to the island of Great Britain, but with fewer people than Fiji, making it the 8th least densely populated country in the world. National population is around 750,000 people, of which roughly 10% identify as Amerindian, that is, indigenous. Remarkably, 85% of Guyana's land area is still covered by tropical rainforest, one of the highest proportions in the world. Guyana's forests are highly biodiverse, even by Amazonian standards, and as such have been a particular focal point for biodiversity conservation projects. The jaguar is the national animal, a symbol both of the country's biodiversity and national identity. Indeed, the national cricket team is called the Guyana Jaguars. Next slide, please. At the same time, the forest is at threat. Although Guyana's government has championed sustainable development initiatives, the economy is largely based on extractive industries, namely gold and bauxite mining, but also a recent oil boom has supercharged the economy along a pathway to economic growth. Vast tracts of the rainforest are scarred by mining, as we see in this photograph. Small-scale gold mining is a prominent source of human-jaguar conflict. Artisanal mining typically takes place along waterways in remote parts of the interior rainforest, ideal habitat for jaguars. In 2015, Guyanese geographer and discussant today, Anthony Cummings, estimated that over 100 jaguars had been killed by gold miners in the preceding decade. Next slide, please. Carib-speaking Makushi people live in the North Rupununi region of southern Guyana, a mosaic of savannas, forests, and wetlands located on the most northerly fringes of the Amazon watershed. Numbering around 12,000 people in Guyana, the Makushi have endured a long and tumultuous history of contact with various colonial and post-colonial forces going back till at least 1740. However, despite a significant degree of cultural, linguistic, and religious transformation, the indigenous conceptual system centered on shamanism and the proliferation of spirits, known as mawari, in the environment, continues to frame interactions with outsiders, including conservationists, today. The Makushi subsistence economy is based on the complementary interaction of hunting, fishing, as we see in the slide here, gardening, and foraging. As such, Makushi people have an intimate association with and understanding of their living environment, including plants, animals, spirits, and other kinds of non-humans. Although Makushi people are skilled hunters, it is rare that people would hunt or otherwise kill a jaguar for reasons relating to cultural practices such as food or medicine. When jaguar killings do occur, they're usually related to conflicts over livestock in cattle ranches in the savannah. Based on first-hand accounts from my interlocutors, I would estimate that around 1 jaguar killing occurs each year per Makushi community. Next slide, please. The Rupununi, historically the site of vast colonial cattle ranches, is today the primary location for Guyana's fledgling ecotourism industry. Today, many Makushi communities collaborate with visiting scientists in managing ecotourism enterprises. Guyana, in theory at least, is something of a mecca for scientific tourists. It is beautiful, biodiverse, and from a Western perspective, relatively unspoiled, to quote Lonely Planet. The reality is that ecotourism levels are low in Guyana in contrast with other countries across the Amazon basin. Ecotourists here are typically scientifically minded Europeans and North Americans, often biologists, ecologists, and environmentalists. The holy grail for these hardcore ecotourists is a jaguar sighting, but this is incredibly rare. Many communities in the Rupununi also participate in biodiversity conservation projects, which bring local people into dialogue with multilateral conservation NGOs. The two major players in Guyana are Conservation International and WWF. But in terms of jaguars, the New York-based conservation group Panthera has been conducting research in the region for around a decade. In 2013, the Guyanese government and Panthera signed an historic jaguar conservation agreement with the objective of launching Guyana's first jaguar conservation framework. Panthera have worked closely with Makushi and Wapishana communities and organizations in the Rupununi in implementing community-based jaguar conservation initiatives. Next slide, please. For anthropologists, it goes without saying that conservation must be treated as a politicized category. It is never neutral. The problem, to paraphrase Paige West, is the commodification and essentialization of nature and culture that often go along with conservation initiatives. Ecotourism and other frameworks for community-based conservation are nevertheless imbued with Western values of nature, often market-orientated and predicated on the idea of natural capital. For local people, the language, concepts, and technologies of scientific conservation can be alienating at best, invasive and neo-colonial at worst. As one Makushi woman told me, despondently, we used to hunt peccaries, collect turtle eggs, and gather medicines from the bush. That was how we managed the forest for many generations. That is our traditional culture. But since the conservation projects came, we had to give that up. Conservation has changed our way of living. Yet, at the same time, there's plenty of evidence that the livelihood practices of indigenous peoples across Amazonia serve not only to maintain the biodiversity of the rainforest, but in many cases to actually increase it. For instance, seminal research by Darryl Posey with the Kayapo, Bill Ballet with the Ka'apo, etc. Michael Sepek has termed such environmental management practices indigenous conservationism. It seems clear that incorporating indigenous knowledge and practices into frameworks for conservation in a way which is both meaningful and structural is imperative. Next slide, please. Understanding indigenous conservationism thus necessitates an appreciation of the deep historical ecology of human-forest mutualism. The deep history of human-jaguar relations in the Guyanas is displayed in pre-Columbian archaeological traditions. For example, the ceramic jaguar seen on the slide, which was dug up by a friend of mine in a Swidden farm, and we've dated this to the Coriabo culture circa 1200 to 1500 AD. The point here is that Amazonian forestscapes are the product of the accumulation of sophisticated place-based knowledge and practices over countless generations built up through historical time. Next slide, please. Now, within the indigenous eco-cosmology, jaguars are without doubt the most cosmologically salient and powerful of all beings. For the Makushi, the environment is populated by an array of powerful spirit beings, including, most prominently, the master spirits, or tamana, which means grandparents, who own the animals, plants, and resources of the forest. Jaguars are their pets, or yakun. As Makushi elder Uncle Isaac once told me, everything has a master. They own the bush. The animals are their pets. And the shaman knows them. He talks to them. Natural scientists recognize 6 species of wild cats in the Guyana Shield, as across Amazonia more broadly. Many more, however, are recognized by the Makushi. These include the tapir tiger, the Warracabra tiger, and the cotton tiger. Collectively, these are all known as kaikushi, or jaguar, and they're often called tiger in Guyanese Creole. From a scientific purview, these ethnospecies of big cat occupy the realm of mythology, perhaps even cryptozoology. But as always, there is more to indigenous knowledge than meets the eye. Next slide, please. Take the tapir tiger as an example. This huge, ferocious cat is said to be dark brown in color, like the tapir, but with white feet. Some say it has 2 tails. Known as wairarima in Makushi, it lives underwater in deep pools in the river. As my research collaborator, Uncle Joel, told me, that is the largest beast. When it shakes, when it's coming out of the water, you hear a sound like thunder. Mythological stories, or pandong, tell of how the tapir tiger was chained to a rock at the bottom of the river by a shaman to prevent it from killing people in a nearby village. The sound of raging water in the swollen river is sometimes said to be the thunderous roar of the tapir tiger, calling from its home in the bottom of the river. The tapir tiger, like the regular jaguar, is thus an apex predator and a central figure in the shamanic cosmos. And so, to understand its power, we must turn our attention to the shaman. Next slide, please. Put simply, shamans are mediators. They mediate relations with others, in Makushi, radiko, on multiple levels and along various intersecting dimensions. These others may include animals, plants, spirits, or other human groups. The shaman, or Piat Zang, navigates the multi-tiered cosmos, communicating with these various human and non-human beings and forces. The shamanic multiverse here is something like a cosmic food web, to use a term from Kai Arhem, structured around relations of predation. In this frame, apex predators such as the jaguar and tapir tiger occupy a particularly important place within the cosmos. In this highly transformational world, the shaman can shapeshift into various other beings, including, importantly, jaguars. As people often say, jaguars are shamans, and human shamans are or can be jaguars. Uncle Isaac once told me, jaguars are shamans. It's no joke, man. They can switch into the Piat Zant now. They are powerful somebodies. They are PI people. By adopting the bodily form of a jaguar, the shaman is able to take on its perspective and thus its habits and dispositions in order to engage in shamanic pursuits such as healing or cosmological warfare. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, maybe we're missing a slide. Could you go back one quickly? Okay, let's stick on this. It's during rituals, as well as dreams and visions, that the shaman communicates with their society of spirit helpers. Their chief interlocutors include the jaguar, hummingbird, swallow-tailed kite, anaconda, plant teachers, as well as the spirits of allied shamans, past and present. I did have a slide, I'm not sure where it's gone, which was depicting a jaguar bone flute used by shamans in healing ceremonies. This particular item was collected in 1910 in my very field site of Yubukari. The bone itself is decorated with symbolic designs representing other shamanic animals, the anaconda, the harpy eagle, and the swallow-tailed kite. The flute would be used in shamanic rituals to call down the Maori spirits to assist the shaman, for instance, in healing a patient. And this sums up what I'm proposing here. A shamanistic approach to conserving the rainforest is deeply relational being predicated upon trans-specific communication and transformation, which unites the cosmos into one integrated sphere of relationships. Shamans and their Jaguar counterparts are the very epicenter of this conceptual system. Next slide, please. So, just to conclude, in this brief talk, I have explored the zone of awkward engagement, to use Anna Tsing's term, between parties including indigenous people, gold miners, ecotourists, and conservation scientists. It is in these spaces of friction that intercultural conflicts and collaborations emerge, often tangled up with one another in complex ways. As we have seen, these are deep-seated, including fundamental disagreements about what kinds of jaguars even exist. There is space here, though, for mutually beneficial collaborations, but standard concepts of participation and empowerment don't get anywhere near close enough to reflecting the complexity and depth of these intercultural and cosmological transactions. A truly decolonized approach to jaguar conservation in Amazonia would be as shamanic as it is natural scientific. The productive tension between these two epistemologies of nature should be the focal point for serious attempts to unsettle, move beyond, even subvert hegemonic ideologies of conservation. Intercultural dialogue is valuable, indeed essential, but so is deeper structural change, which is at once political, economic, and ontological. Only then might we move towards a truly decolonized, multinatural conservationism in Amazonia. Final slide, please. Oh, well, they're in the wrong order. There's the Jaguar bone flute that I was talking about a couple of minutes ago. Final slide, please. And that's the end. So just to say thank you very much. Here on the slide are my research collaborators, host institutions, and funders. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Lewis. That was truly excellent. Thank you. It was really good to hear. So we've heard so far today from Barbara and Lewis, the Jaguar is intricately connected to the cultures of indigenous peoples. Community-based conservation efforts, as Lewis pointed out, are also going to be critical for the continuous survivability, not only of jaguars, but the people who live close to them and their cultures. Understanding and documenting the interactions between people and jaguars, by its very nature, needs to be accomplished through a variety of media. Following Barbara's and Lewis's talk, our next presentation looks at another way to capture indigenous peoples and their interactions with wildcats. Simon is not here today, so he's not here to take questions. But in a moment, Lucia is going to share with you his contact details. So in the event you would like to send him questions, you can reach out to him directly. Over to Lucia for Simon's presentation.
Hola a todos, mi nombre es Simón González, soy el director de la película Jaguar, voz de un territorio. Pero más allá, capitalista, fue una persona que tuvo la posibilidad de ir más de 10 años con diferentes comunidades indígenas a lo largo del territorio colombiano, compartiendo con ellos su conocimiento acerca del jaguar, la relación que ha tenido con el ser humano de tiempos muy antiguos. Tener esta posibilidad de acercarnos a las comunidades inicialmente con el fin de transmitir un mensaje a través de un audiovisual, a través de una película, me permitió hacer como un redescubrimiento y un planteamiento nuevamente de mi vida como ser humano. ¿Qué estaba haciendo yo realmente con la vida y qué entendía por la naturaleza? Y a través de seguirle los pasos al jaguar, de seguir indagando, de buscarlos por las montañas, por las selvas, por los ríos, pues comencé a verme como persona veía la naturaleza aparte de mí y no me estaba reconociendo real ser natural. Y lo que desde el comienzo de esta investigación siempre se me habló, pero me costó mucho entenderlo, fue verdaderamente a verme a mí mismo como un ser natural y cómo las tradiciones indígenas a través de ciertos animales, en este caso del jaguar, han descubierto que ellos hacen parte de la naturaleza y que son tan esenciales para la naturaleza como las plantas, como el agua, las selvas, como el mismo jaguar. Y este animal, digamos que, así como lo vemos o como lo ven algunos científicos, es muy importante para el control de los ecosistemas. Es donde la vida está más pura, donde los ecosistemas están mejor conservados. Las comenzaron a entender esto desde hace muchísimo tiempo y aprenderlo, interiorizarlo para ellos y encontrar una forma más acorde, ¿no? de vivir con el mundo natural. La ciencia del jaguar lo llaman ellos, ¿no? Y es la posibilidad de cómo el ser humano puede llegar a unos estados de conciencia para entrar a ser parte de ese mismo animal o de cualquier otro animal. Escuchaba yo que tenían la posibilidad de ver a través de allá o correr con los mismos pies del jaguar, desplazarse largas distancias, que no me preguntara posible formarse o no transformarse, sino que verdaderamente cuando entendiera y me pudiera lograr ser natural, podría descubrir todas las capacidades del ser humano. Entonces esto realmente comenzó una cantidad de planteamientos más allá de pensar en que si iba a lograr hacer una película o no una película, quedar con esto, fue hacerme un planteamiento como ser humano y llevar al equipo con el que vamos trabajando, las comunidades, a tener ciencias, a que verdaderamente lográramos entender como permiso para entrar a un territorio, ¿no? Es como cuando uno llega a una casa, a la casa de alguien y no pides permiso, sino entras directamente y te sientas en la sala, bueno, y no has pedido los permisos, pues es cuando llegue el dueño del lugar, seguramente se va a disgustar bastante contigo. Esto pasa también mucho con la naturaleza, porque ahí viven muchos seres. Esto pasa mucho en las comunidades indígenas, en los territorios. Son territorios que están haciendo un gran esfuerzo para mantener la vividad, darnos agua, darnos aire, todos esos elementos necesarios que el ser humano necesita. Entonces, de la mano de todas estas comunidades, lo que fuimos comenzándolas a visitar, se fue abriendo más como esa puerta, ese respeto, ese saber pedir un permiso para entrar al lugar y se pide de la misma forma y con la misma intención que entre nosotros los humanos nos pedimos permiso, tener un respeto por acercarse a un río, es tener un respeto, acercarse a la selva y tener un gran respeto por acercarse al jaguar y poder hablar al jaguar. El jaguar para pues lo que me pudieron convertir comunidades indígenas es un mayor, es un abuelo, es una energía muy antigua, muy incluso que viene desde otros planetas, desde hace mucho, sagrada aquí a la tierra, y era entregarnos ese conocimiento de respeto, de humildad, de equilibrio, porque un animalito de estos no anda por la selva por andar, ni anda destruyendo, ni anda matando, pero sí anda descuidando, controlando, eh, protegiendo los territorios. Y aparte de eso, pues tiene un conocimiento enorme, ¿no? La botánica que al conocer el jaguar yo creo que está muy avanzada comparación de la botánica que entendemos nosotros, los seres humanos. El jaguar tiene que alimentarse de todas las plantas, de todos los animales. Y desde ahí fue que las comunidades indígenas entendieron la importancia de acercarse a la ciencia que él maneja, al conocimiento, y así comenzar a abrir el poder de muchas plantas maestras de conocimiento, plantas para hacer curación de medicina, plantas que actualmente mucho en la medicina moderna, pero todo esto ha sido, digamos que de una u otra forma, desde la misma tradición del ser humano, de tener esa conexión real con el mundo natural, y pues todo esto ha sido también heredado de comunidades indígenas, ¿no? Nosotros cuando tuvimos la posibilidad de acercarnos a todos estos encuentros, nos veíamos como todas las noches la comunidad se congregaba, se sentaba bajo un fuego y decían, vamos a prender el televisor, vamos a mirar las noticias. Y mientras prendían el fuego, todo, pasado, presente y futuro. Y ahí estaba muy presente el jaguar. Hablar del jaguar o la concepción del tiempo, como la entendemos nosotros, es distinta. Para eso, los antiguos, nuestros ancestros, que solemos verlos como si fuera el pasado, ellos van mucho más adelante. Son personas que trascendieron ya el cuerpo físico y están en un tiempo más adelante y buscan consultarlos para retraer ese conocimiento para el presente y poderlo visualizar en lo que nosotros llamamos hoy un futuro, ¿no? Entonces el jaguar ha tenido una relación muy, muy grande, hace muchísimo tiempo, que es vital que hoy en día los seres humanos la tengamos muy presente dentro de nosotros. Con lo que hicimos con la película, de acercarnos, de vivenciar una cantidad de ceremonias que verdaderamente nos llevaban cada vez más a indagar dentro de nosotros, fue que se nos entregó como esa gran responsabilidad de compartir ese mensaje. Y lo que nosotros buscábamos hacer era recibir ese conocimiento directo y bajo el uso de las tecnologías, de las cámaras, que es lo que sabemos hacer nosotros, por un lado recibirlo y por el otro lado tender la mano para compartirlo, sabiendo lo importante que es preservar a los seres humanos, a la vida, al mundo natural, que retornemos nuevamente a ese mundo natural. Entonces, desde ahí, pues ese acercamiento ha sido muy valioso para nosotros, mantenerlo, ver el resultado que ha tenido el tiempo, que se ha podido compartir en diferentes plataformas, en diferentes festivales, o simplemente en un proceso educativo con colegios y con universidades, ya que el tema no está abarcado desde el estudio científico, ambientalista o antropológico, sino es más como la relación que ha tenido y lo que ellos nos podían compartir, directamente su palabra, directamente la voz de ese territorio que con fuerza hoy busca ser escuchado, ¿no? Digamos que pasamos una situación muy compleja, o todavía el mundo está pasando una situación muy compleja con la gran pandemia que nos ha llegado, y a mí me permitía entender que de una u otra forma era tener la posibilidad de ponerse en los pies nuevamente del jaguar. A nosotros nos mandaron a estar encerrados en nuestras casas. Si salimos, nos podemos enfermar, nos podemos morir. Es algo de lo que nosotros, por medio de esa desconexión que hemos tenido, empujamos a muchos animales, en este caso también al jaguar, a vivir desplazado de sus territorios, a que si se mueve lo pueden cazar, o que estén deforestando su territorio, ya no tiene el alimento suficiente, entonces entran a haber problemas con ganaderías, bueno, con minería. Pero sí hay formas realmente de encontrar ese equilibrio. Y una de esas grandes formas que hay es volver a ese futuro, voy a decirlo así, como lo llamaban los indígenas, y es retraer el conocimiento de nuestros ancestros, de cómo de una manera armoniosa se puede vivir con el mundo natural, con ese respeto, respetándome a mí mismo como ser humano. Puedo comenzar a respetar al otro, y puedo comenzar a respetar el aire, el agua. Entonces, pues bueno, esto fue un poco como de la experiencia que nosotros tuvimos a lo largo de de estos 10 años caminando con distintas comunidades indígenas y vimos cómo se fue transmitiendo y se ha ido transmitiendo de generación en generación ese legado, esa palabra importante de vida, ¿no? Ellos lo llaman ley de origen, esa ley de origen que es, abramos las sagradas escrituras, pero de la madre tierra, y leamos los árboles, leamos qué pasa con los pajaritos hoy, leamos qué pasa con el jaguar, que hoy verdaderamente para aprender. Y hay una riqueza enorme en cuando el ser humano logra verdaderamente abrir como su corazón a entenderse y a verse nuevamente como ser natural. Y eso pasa, se ha ido transmitiendo hasta que se nos da la posibilidad de llegar a nosotros, a Occidente, con los audiovisuales, comenzar a divulgar estos viajes, ya que hoy en día, pues, mucho de lo que nosotros somos es el reflejo de lo que vemos por las pantallas, por los televisores, por el celular. Esto genera un gran impacto en el comportamiento de nosotros hoy en día. Entonces buscamos llevar mensajes de conciencia que nos permitan comenzar a visualizar un vivir y a comenzar a generar unas acciones grandes de cambio que son de gran importancia. Un abuelo me decía, casi que llorando, se le veían las lágrimas salir, y decía, mira, mi hijo, es muy nosotros los indígenas nos estamos acabando, ya se están muriendo, y eventualmente vamos a desaparecer. Pero lo más importante en este momento es que tú y yo nos podamos encontrar, porque nosotros necesitamos esa semilla dentro de ustedes para un tiempo, pero esa semilla, si queda bien sembrada, esa semilla va a nacer dentro de cada uno de ustedes, porque son ustedes los que van a continuar viviendo. Y es adentro de ustedes donde el jaguar va a brotar y va a rugir con fuerza para darnos ese aliento, esa palabra de vida, para enseñarnos la templanza, para enseñarnos de humildad, para enseñarnos de respeto, para enseñarnos de convivencia, de valentía. Y aparte de eso, bueno, tiene toda la botánica, la medicina, y ya digamos que en palabras, algunos antropólogos lo pondrán chamánicas, o hay una visión muy fuerte y un grado del manejo de la energía de estos animales de poder, y nos damos cuenta que la tecnología del ser humano se puede desarrollar también de otra muy avanzada, mucho más equilibrada con el mural, que no hay necesidad de tener naves, de aviones para generar viajes, como ellos me decían, que podían volar a través de los ojos, ver a través de los ojos de la guacamaya, o desplazar grandes distancias, conseguir el alimento necesario, simplemente teniendo estos animales de poder como aliados. Entonces esto es algo de la experiencia que nosotros vivimos, una alegría poder estar acá en este espacio, nuevamente compartiendo una palabra una experiencia, una palabra que se me compartió de la voz de las comunidades indígenas, y tener esa posibilidad de estar acá para compartirlas con ustedes, pues para mí es un honor. Y bueno, muchas gracias. Esto es un poco lo que les quería compartir.
Well, it's not often that I get emotional at the academic meeting, but that was truly touching. That was really something. So we need to really reach out to Simon and thank him for that wonderful presentation. And really, now I want to see more. Now I want to talk more to him and see what else he's up to. That was really something. So, this panel this morning is really emphasizing for us the critical job we need to continue doing, not only keeping the Jaguar in focus, but also understanding people and understanding their relationships to people. But Our final presentation today comes from a country close by to mine, and one of those countries, certainly in the literature, where we don't quite have a full understanding of the status of the jaguar. So I'm excited that Vanessa is here today to share what's happening in Suriname and to give us some different insights. Over to Vanessa.
Thank you, Anthony, for the I am very excited to be here to present to you our study on jaguars following the royal bloodline of an apex predator, looking at the jaguar population status at Brownsburg Nature Park, Suriname. Next slide, please. We know that the jaguar is a very important keystone species in contributing to ecosystem health, and is therefore often used as an indicator or a tool for management tool in nature or in policy making. However, the jaguar is, or unfortunately, the jaguar is threatened by habitat loss due to gold mining, logging, but also in retaliatory killing, in human jaguar conflict situations, but also more recently due to illegal trade in jaguar parts for medicine to, for instance, to create the infamous jaguar paste, which hasn't been proved to actually work. But this is one of the reasons also that the jaguar population is under threat in all of its distribution area. In a 2010 study, we found that most conflict situations are a result of either, conflict situations between human and retaliatory killing as a result of human jaguar conflict situations. That was, I think, also as a result of predation on livestock, that was 49%, but also due to hunting, which was 33%, but also most commonly as a result of fear. We also found that gold mining is often linked to hunting. The gold miners are in the field for an extended period of time. During this time, they resort to hunting because they have to provide in their subsistence. And as a cause of that, they will also hunt jaguars. And they know that the jaguars are in high demand by some people from the Chinese community, and they know they can sell it for a lucrative sum of money. So they will also resort to jaguar poaching. But there's a difference between the small-scale gold mining and the larger companies in gold mining. For instance, in the larger companies, they often try to protect the forest around their concessions, and even will insert biodiversity hotspots. And they try to do this to keep the population of mammals within their concessions at a normal, relatively normal level. But what we often see happens is that the government will issue permits or logging rights in those forests. And often what happens is that loggers come in those forests and they will start hunting. And then what we've seen through wildlife monitoring studies in these concessions is that the population, as soon as the loggers come in, will decline. And this is also the case for the larger cats, the jaguar and the puma, unfortunately. Next slide, please. We did our study at Brownsburg. This is a picture taken from the Brokopondo hydropower lake. You can see the Brownsburg mountain in the distance. It's a relatively flat ferrobauxite mountain at a height of approximately 500 meters. Next slide, please. At Brownsburg, the Brownsburg Nature Park was established in 1970, and it encompasses an area of approximately 11,800 hectares. The park is mostly exploited for ecotourism, research, and education. If you could do 2 more clicks, then we can see that the park has a really high diversity of species. We have, for instance, all the 8 monkey species that occur in Suriname you can find in the Brownsburg Nature Park. Next slide, please. However, Brownsburg Nature Park is also under threat due to gold mining and logging, and as a result of that, also hunting. For instance, there is gold mining activities taking place at the base of the mountain. We can see here in a picture bottom right of a gold mining area at the west side of the mountain, but also in the east, the same activities are taking place. There is also logging. We have more recently in 2019 encountered logging activities on one of the trails that we use for camera trapping. This is a closed road, so only us as researchers visit this trail to surface our cameras. We've seen also from a study by Lemeu, I'm not sure my French is horrible, Lemeu and Bruchy, they found that near gold mining companies or logging companies or also farming companies, those areas have the highest number of jaguar poaching. So for instance, here we see a hunter at the Masaroni Road on the plateau of Brownsburg Nature Park. And the number of hunters have increased also due to COVID, because the park was closed for extended time. And we've seen on the camera pictures that the number of hunters have increased. They became more boldly, they will walk on trails, they will even attack our cameras. So this has only been increasing as a result of COVID. Next slide, please. For the study we conducted from 2012 till 2020, we looked at the population density of jaguars in the park. We looked at tenure, we looked at detection frequency, so the trail used by jaguars, and we also looked at the impact of ecotourism on jaguar populations. Next slide, please. Within the long-term study, we had a period of continuous trapping that was from 2013 till 2016. During this time, we had 27 camera traps in the area, which were distributed over 16 camera trap stations. In this map, you can see the camera trap stations. We had cameras along the Masaroni Road. I'm pointing at my screen, but I'm not sharing, so sorry. But in the middle, you can see the Masaroni Road. This is the road that connects the plateau with the village of Brownsburg. Brownsburg is a Saramakan village. It's actually populated by people that were transmigrated from the area where we now have the hydropower lake. We also had cameras on trails going to waterfalls and other tourist attractions. And we also had cameras more to the bottom of the map, cameras at the South Plateau and the Jeep Trail. Those were closed roads, so those roads weren't visited by traffic, only by us as the researchers. And in this case, Masaroni Road was then the open roads, which we had traffic and hikers, etc. In the bottom picture, you can see me in the field putting up a camera. We had them mostly at a height of 60 centimeters, targeting the highest, the biggest animal in Suriname, which is the tapir. Next slide, please. For the data analysis, we identified 27 jaguars. If you do 2 more clicks, we can see some extra information. I identified the jaguars based on their individual rosette pattern. So there aren't 2 jaguars with the same rosette pattern. For instance, the top pictures, if you can click further, please. The top pictures are 2 jaguars at the same locations. If you look on the right, you can see that the jaguars on the right has testicles and the one on the left does not, meaning that those are 2 different jaguars, 2 different individuals at the same location. The bottom pictures shows 2 jaguars of differing size, but if you look closely, they have the same rosette pattern. If another click, you will see the comparison with the jaguar on the right, meaning those are both the same individual. Next slide, please. We also looked at tenure and reproduction. Tenure is the length of residency of jaguars in an area. We categorized resident individuals and transient individuals. So resident individuals would be any individual that had a tenure of 3 years or longer in the area. We also added adult females with a pup as resident individuals, because females will only reproduce when they have true residency in an area. Transient individuals, on the other hand, were individuals that had a tenure of 2 years or less. We also looked at reproduction. We looked at courtship events and offspring. So courtship event was distinguished in courtship and presumable courtship. So courtship event would be when we have photographic evidence, the top pictures of two jaguars walking together, a male and a female. And you can see also the names of the individuals. In this case, it was Willem Alexander and Maxima. So you will notice they have royal names, and of course they are the kings and queens of the jungle, so they have to be treated as such. And when it was a presumable event, it would be a case where we had, well, not actual pictures of the two jaguars walking together, but because there were pictures of two males, sorry, a male and a female walking in close proximity from each other, so the close vicinity of the two cameras in short distance, then we would know that those two jaguars are involved in a courtship. And of course, offspring would be mother and pup. Here is Kate with her son, George. Next slide, please. During this study, I identified 27 jaguars, 7 females, 18 males, and 2 individuals of unknown sex. Here you can see 9 species of the resident species that were identified. We also noticed that there were 7 courtship events, so actual pictures with 2 jaguars walking together, because they are normally solitary in species. So when they walk together, it's either in a courtship or it's a mother and young. We have 3 presumable courtship events, and from those courtship events, we had 5 offspring were born from 4 litters. You can see here Amalia was one of the female that was born from Maxima and Willem Alexander. Actually, so we thought, but well, actually afterwards we saw that it was something else. Well, she had other parents, but that's a tabloid story for another presentation. Sorry. And we also calculated the population density. This varied between 0.51 and 4.21 individuals per 100 square kilometer. Next slide, please. For the tenure, in this table, you can see that the tenure was set out for the period 2012 till 2020. We can see that all the individuals above the dashed line are the resident individuals, and all the individuals beneath are the transient individuals. The gray columns are data gaps, so these were the periods that we didn't have cameras in the field. We can see that Amalia had the longest tenure in the area of 9 years, followed by Philip, who had a tenure of 5 years. We can also see that most jaguars had resident individuals had a tenure of 3 years, while the transient individuals had a tenure of only 1 year. Next slide, please. Looking at how the jaguars utilize the area, we can see that the resident females were more often detected on open roads. So those are the roads where cars and tourists were walking. And this was also the case even when they have young. Looking at resident males, we see that they were the least detected on trails, while the trails were dominated by transient males. We also noticed that resident females, when they were carrying for their young, they were rarely seen on closed roads. The closed roads were those that you specifically kept open for the jaguar so they could have their catwalks. The next slide, please. When we looked at the impact of ecotourism on jaguars, we noticed that mostly there was a shift in their activity pattern. In the graphs here, the density is plotted against the time. In the graph on the left, we can see the situation in an undisturbed area and in an area with many tourists. And also on the graph on the right, you can see the situation for undisturbed area with an area compared to an area with many cars. And overall, we can see that the jaguars avoided trails with many hikers, and on trails with a lot of traffic, a heavy traffic pressure, they altogether shifted their activity from catamaral to more nocturnal. So they weren't often seen at daytime as during the night. Next slide, please. In conclusion, we found a density that was 0.51 till, well, varied from 0.51 to 4.21 individuals per 100 square kilometers. And we compared this number with other studies in the distribution area of the Jaguar. And for their studies, they found densities that varied between 0 and 6 individuals per 100 square kilometers, sorry. And based on this, we can say that the population density of jaguars at Brownsburg is actually relatively high, which you wouldn't expect due to all the gold mining, logging, and hunting that is occurring in the area. We also find that the density is mostly related to behavioral changes, so either abiotic or biotic. Biotic would be the case when there is a courtship event happening between two jaguars, then they would be walking and triggering all the cameras in the area. And then because of this, you have many recaptures, and as a result, a higher density in the area. And as an abiotic factor, for instance, they did the rehabilitation of the road going up. I'm not sure if any of you've been there, but it's a horrible road going into the park, and it was due for rehabilitation. And during this period, we noticed that the jaguars, they were more detected towards the South Plateau. And as a result of that, the density also increased. We also found that there was an overall high tenure of resident individuals, which is 3 years, and also a short tenure of transient individuals. And the other long-term study that we know of was conducted in Belize in the Coxsone Basin, which was a previous logging area, I think. And there they found that a short tenure or a high turnover of jaguars is related to poaching. And as I mentioned before, the study by Lumux and Bruschi, they indicated indeed that there is poaching of jaguar going on, and there have been observations by colleagues of us in the village of Brownsburg that jaguars have been sold to supermarket owners, Chinese supermarket owners in the area. So we do know that there is poaching going on of jaguars. We also noticed that while the population of jaguar is stable, there is a lot of courtship events, and as a result of that, a lot of offspring in the area. Actually, one of the, I think the second highest or third highest number of offsprings and courtship that we have found in the literature. We've noticed that ecotourism has an impact on jaguar activity pattern, that they will shift their activity pattern in accordance to tourist activity. And mostly we say ecotourism is the best way to go, but there can still be consequences of many tourists in the area, because Brownsburg Nature Park is, for instance, the most visited tourist area in Suriname. So that explains it also. We also saw that the human-jaguar conflict situation are mostly as a result of fear, and secondly, as a result of illegal jaguar trade. The previous speakers also mentioned that there's always a relationship between indigenous people and the jaguar, and they have this relationship in almost all the distribution area of the jaguar. I do think this is also the case in Suriname, but excuse me, I have never done this study yet, but we are planning on carrying a similar study out in Suriname to see what the relationship is. So people, it turns out that people don't have enough knowledge on jaguar, and for instance, that is the reason why they encounter one, and out of fear they will kill the jaguar. So that is my presentation. Next slide, please. I hope you enjoyed this, and of course we all want to be a jaguar. I hope this is also the case for you. Thank you for your attention.
Truly outstanding. Thank you so much, Vanessa. And this morning some incredible presentations and scholars who are so invested in their work and trying to understand the Jaguar and trying to understand people and their connections to Jaguar. So thank you all very much for taking the time to come here to this forum and share your work with us. My colleague, Silvio Marchani, I don't see him in the list of participants at the moment, but I did see he sent a comment earlier, so I don't know, he disappeared, but he put together some very good questions, and I want to begin the discussion here by posing one of the questions that Silvio posed yesterday to the other panelists, so that we do have some consistency across what happened yesterday and today. And as I noted early on, in my view, this is a continuation, just interrupted, if you like, by the fact that we needed to, we're at a conference, so we need to go to bed. So here we go. So one of the questions that Sylvia posed yesterday to the other panelists, I want to give each of you a chance to respond. He said, there are clearly great opportunities to expand and improve conservation strategies, incorporating traditional knowledge and the perspective of anthropologists. I want to invite the entire panel to share your expertise on this question first. Has all this potential been fully realized? If not, are there barriers preventing this from happening? What are these barriers? And how do we overcome these barriers so that Jaguar research and conservation becomes an interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary as it should be? So I'm going to mute my microphone and allow my colleagues to respond.
The corrective always was to start, but I want someone else to start.
Well, yeah, sure. I could say a few words. First of all, thanks so much, Anthony, for hosting the session so wonderfully. And thanks as well for your presentations, Vanessa and Barbara and Simone. Yeah, I think it's the crucial question, and it's extraordinarily complex. I mean, first of all, I think it's fantastic that we're all here, from various disciplines, and we're talking to each other in such a productive way. I mean, just listening to Vanessa's presentation, it's incredible and so fascinating. I'm a layman, of course, when it comes to anything to do with the sort of serious research on jaguar populations in Guyana. What I know comes by virtue of my exposure to indigenous knowledge, but also working with some visiting scientists as well. And I don't know, I mean, I'd say that in the context that I work in with just several Makushi communities in Guyana, the relationships with visiting scientists are generally pretty good. At face value, on a day-to-day level, these are pretty harmonious relationships. But I guess what I was trying to get at a bit more in my talk is that there are always underlying power dynamics at play, and they often relate to what kind of knowledge we deem to be accurate. And there clearly is some kind of power dynamic there between indigenous knowledge and scientific knowledge. So, just working for 2 years in these communities, it took quite a long time for me to see some of those underlying tensions and conflicts actually emerge. And I think if I'd have just been in a community for a short period of time, I wouldn't have seen that, I wouldn't have been party to that. But factions that emerged in the village, pro-conservation and anti-conservation, that happens. And that's economic too. There's always money involved or resource dynamics involved in these transactions. So yeah, I think, Anthony, that's the key question, and it's one that I think about a lot and I really don't have an answer to. But I think there is a lot of hope, as I tried to say in my conclusion. There are mutually beneficial collaborations and just wonderful relationships which transpire between local villagers and visiting scientists in the Rupununi.
Okay, now I can add. I just going on from the anthropology to biologists and also geographers. I've been teaching interdisciplinary courses and always trying to dialogue. In UNILA, we do that a lot with colleagues from the other areas. So also in the Iguaçu waterfall park there in Brazil and Argentina, I try to work closer to biologists who work in those projects, like carnivore project, for example, in the Iguaçu Falls. And for them, it was like they liked to hear the stories about the Amazon. So I think the storytelling, going back to Anthony's opening of our panel today, is a way to relate. And also maybe we could think on, two hand courses, the doble mano, it's in Spanish, I don't know exactly how to say that in English, like we could offer some anthropological training for biologists and receive training from biologists, because also even people who do multi-species anthropology, we have not a training in biology. So it's like a kind of lousy biology that anthropologists do, and the other way around as well, that the biologists also sometimes say stuff where we think like, wow, it's so much more profound because we are dedicated to that. But then this kind of leveling the both, also the concepts, trying to translate them from one area to the other, like from biologists to anthropologists and vice versa. I think that's a way to trespass the barrier, answering to Anthony's question, and how to overcome. I think doing more interdisciplinary work and be humble that we need to learn more from the biologists and what they do, this kind of monitor of the designs. I've been studying that when I was writing my thesis, because I was trying to grasp this, that the indigenous have this ability to know more about observing patterns and stuff. So I think that would be a way to try to overcome. And then I give the floor to other colleagues to listen to that.
Yes, I totally agree. Up till now, I have been in this tunnel view of only conservation, but of course, if you count out the people that live directly in the area with the jaguars, then I don't think you can be successful in your endeavor. So, of course, now we are more trying to reach out to communities. For instance, we have projects in the pipeline that we will be training rangers in the area, and so they can then tell us what the best way is for conservation, because up till now it's not really working. For instance, there are national parks and other reserves that have been installed without knowledge of the local people. Then for sure you can expect that they will not contribute in active conservation of the jaguar. And unfortunately, there have been accidents also of jaguars attacking children in the village, and in those villages you dare not talk about the jaguar. But still, we have to find a way through to make sure that the jaguar still exists and the community gets to understand the value of the jaguar. Example that I often use is by telling people that, for instance, the jaguar has its place in the ecosystem. For instance, if they have crops and the jaguar doesn't keep the balance of herbivores in check, then their crops will be destroyed. And this is the most simple way to put it for the people, because they relate better to this. So this is mostly our approach. But the problem is people, the indigenous, don't have work often in the livelihood. So it's quite hard for them to explain that if you kill a jaguar, you're taking away from the forest where you live, etc. Because for them, the value of the jaguar can be in so many different aspects, and try to explain this is quite hard. But I think to answer in short, we have to include them more in conservation and try to understand their perspective of what conservation should be, with it, what it should look like, because mostly we're trying to enforce this westernized, sorry to use that word, but another approach from outside, not from the village within. So I think if we change our perspective, we could reach a better, meet somewhere in between, and then we can help the jaguar, which is brilliant. I want to be one, but so I think if we try that approach, we can get a better success. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for responding. I see a couple of, well, more than a couple actually. There are about 4 of our panelists from yesterday who are currently online. Would any of you like to comment, and perhaps you have a slightly different answer today than you did yesterday that you want to share with us? Should I put on my professor's hat and just call him out by name? Like, hey, Felipe.
Exactly. Use your position of being the call Felipe Susic.
Here you go, Felipe. Thank you.
For years, we tried to connect our data and our research. And so because he always said to me, we work with the onceros, like the Jaguar people, the indigenous and the people from the Pantanal. So please, Felipe.
Hi, everyone. Nice discussion today. I'm very pleased to be here and to listen to you. And I think this panel and this exercise we are doing here, this is the way that we can learn with each other and discuss and try to do some connected research in the future. It's difficult because we have this training in different academic fields, but I think there are some connections being produced today between biology and anthropology in many ways. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Felipe. Glenn, are you still there? I see you're still in the meeting, but.
I was gonna get some shamanic.
I'm still here.
I'm gonna go to the rapé and I come back to have a shamanic moment. Hi, Glenn. I'm gonna get some rapé to listen to you.
Just 1 second. Yeah. Call me right back. Thank you. A minute.
Maria Fernanda, you can go while Glenn finishes up his telephone call.
Hola, buenas tardes. Voy a hablar en español. Es que, disculpen el ruido alrededor, estoy en un café para poder tener internet. Aquí en Venezuela es un poco complicado. ¿Me escuchan bien? Ok. Bueno, sí, como estaban discutiendo todos, creo que parte de lo que acá sucede en lo que estamos viviendo hoy en esta conferencia es justamente lo que necesitamos, ¿no? Un poquito de combinarnos entre la parte científica, lo que es la parte antropológica, lo que es la parte de educación, que creo que es fundamental en nuestro proceso de conservación del jaguar. Creo que esto que estamos haciendo hoy, o desde ayer, y bueno, desde hace unos meses con otros foros que hemos estado, inclusive casi que el mismo grupo, creo que es algo fundamental para que se refuerce conocimiento, por lo menos yo, que trabajo con las comunidades locales, a veces con las comunidades indígenas, siento que necesito esa capacitación que ha mencionado Bárbara, de la parte antropológica, ¿no? Y quizás esa pedagogía también para poder transformar la información científica, que yo siempre digo, hay que transformar la información científica para que llegue a todos los niveles y que realmente el trabajo tenga un fin. Porque muy bien la parte científica tiene un valor importante a nivel académico, a nivel científico, pero realmente quien está conviviendo con el jaguar no maneja estos términos científicos y hay que buscar la manera de traducirlo y llevarlo a esas comunidades, ¿no? Entonces creo que parte de eso viene también de tener conocimientos a nivel antropológico, educativo, la pedagogía, que es sumamente importante. Así que bueno, esto que estamos haciendo ahorita creo que es un gran paso de lo que, y creo que ahorita lo veo, antes era una conferencia de puros científicos, no había una combinación, ¿no? Y eso creo que hoy estamos un paso mucho más adelante de lo que quizás hace algunos años estaba. Y bueno, gracias nuevamente a Liliana y a Lucía por la invitación y a todos por sus presentaciones.
Yeah. Anyway, so I'm leaving for Peru in a couple of hours, and I was taking care of some last minute purchases on the phone and stuff like that. But I was listening through most of the sessions, and I think I'm going back to what Silvio's comment yesterday about these different axes and how they tie together, and how the different papers sort of fit into these different axes. And I think we saw, I mean, there is this big divide between the sort of the natural sciences, conservation biology, and the human sciences. And we saw those differences, fairly clearly, even in the presentation styles, the material that was covered. But I think we saw, with some of the papers yesterday involved in community engagement, and then especially Lewis's paper today, sort of what would shamanic jaguar conservation be? I think we saw these sort of poles that can seem like very distant opposites. I think we saw those two poles come very close, and say the beekeeper paper yesterday, I don't know what language I'm speaking, the beekeeper paper yesterday, and then Lewis's paper today, they didn't quite touch, but they're getting close. And I think that there's that missing bridge that needs to be put. It's not quite there yet, but it's getting close. And I think those two papers, especially, I mean, all the papers were very enriching and very important, but I think those two papers were the ones that maybe came the closest together. And Maria Fernandez as well. How do we create community engagement in jaguar conservation? And maybe the link of that is, at least for indigenous peoples, this shamanic connection, the things that Barbara was talking about, that I was talking about, and especially that Lewis was talking about. There are these other conceptions of jaguars, other values of jaguars. And so I think community engagement from the conservation side needs to bridge that ontological gap and create this real dialogue to create, to connect those two. We're almost there, but I think that connection needs to be made, and it needs to be made explicitly, and not just sort of, often that it's with jaguars, they're important for local peoples, but that explicit ontological connection that I think Lewis expressed it the most clearly. And I think that is the missing link for this ongoing work.
I think about the shamanic, not just the view, but like more the respect of taking seriously what the Simon is pity that he is not here now, because he was the one who was, from his recorded presentation, like I felt like, okay, you were almost in a Witoto Mambiadero, taking mambe and listening to the elders. And that's what he tries, and he explained that on his presentation, tries to bring us there, to the Mambiadero, to the shamanic moment where people try to teach, or a biologist or anthropologist or whatever non-indigenous person is there, that they try to teach those deep knowledge, really concerned with the life of the young ones, or of the forest, or the natural beings, the supernatural beings. So I think that is also a way to create those conversations, and that we as scientists, that we really put ourselves in this position of listening to an elder talking truth and teaching us something. that I think is what is a way to relate the anthropological knowledge and indigenous knowledge in a very respectful way that as anthropologists we are trained for. And I think the biologists are always being in that path. You see from the work of Maria Fernanda, Vanessa, Melissa yesterday, that they also, they have been in the appendix, sitting on the floor and on the Mambiadero.
Yeah, just to quickly add to that, I think the format of how we present our research is hugely important here. Classically, of course, most of our disciplines are text-based, at least the way that we publish. But I think there's great potential in multimedia methods, particularly in collaborations with indigenous experts and communities. So exploring different kinds of video media. I mean, Glenn's been working on this with Kayapo communities very recently, in fact, as a way of expressing these complex intercultural dialogues through a medium that's not so alienating for many people, which is this incredibly dense kind of speaking as an anthropologist here, incredibly dense, often quite jargon-filled style of prose. It's difficult for people who aren't anthropologists to understand that, let alone anybody else. And across Amazonia, for sure, there's been some extraordinary, innovative, multimedia, collaborative research that's been done since at least the 80s, but there's loads happening right now. So I think that's a really exciting frontier for these kind of collaborations across scientific, anthropological, and indigenous knowledge systems.
Melissa, thanks.
I think just perhaps to add to that, I don't know if we still have time, but I mean, this conference has been an incredible way to bring us all together and start discussing about this interdisciplinarity. And I wish there were more opportunities to do the same. But I think we can also try to build these opportunities whenever we apply for research grants or look for funding and do our field work. It would be great to join forces. And I think there's definitely a big value in each individual trying to learn from the other disciplines, but they also require a lot of expertise and a lot of dedication of many years of education. So we cannot attempt to be everything, anthropologists and biologists and sociologists. So I think the idea of joining forces rather than trying to be everything ourselves, but just inviting others to join our projects and to go out together to collect our different pieces of data and then create an output that can combine them in a creative and appealing way could really do a lot. And it's just a matter of coordination. So I think if we thought about this more the next time we apply for grants, then we could do something really nice.
Thank you all so much. It sounds as though we need to really engage our friends over the IUCN to keep this collaboration going and really bring us together, right? I think that's what we're hearing here.
That's the idea also. Yes.
And so have we, I may have missed something, but have we made progress on the idea of putting this together as a book or a special issue? I think this would make a great, a great contribution to what we're saying. You may have discussed this earlier. I didn't get to hear all the papers, but I think that would be a really great next step for this.
I agree. That'll be a fantastic next step. I'm glad. I don't think we have explicitly covered it over the past couple of days, but I think we should certainly plan to re-engage very soon to keep this momentum going first and foremost. And I like the way you put things together early on and trying to look at that arc and how we're conceptualizing our work around the Jaguar. And I think that in itself could be a very important contribution to placing the state of knowledge as we speak on how we understand and work with the Jaguar. And that in itself for me is a very important contribution we can make to science on the whole and knowledge creation more broadly.
There is another way, very easy, that is to write together. Co-authorship is also very challenging in different fields, but it's also a way that you go into a data and then profoundly with someone exchanging ideas and analysis and concepts as well, that you can try to put stuff together from anthropological and biological fields, trying to create something together that can be interdisciplinary. I think that is also an easier way to start creating, papers or films, multi-audiovisual, so as Lewis said, but then together, trying to give a format to some data, with both inputs or more from cinema, from arts. A lot of people are doing it as well, and it's also very interesting.
Well, colleagues, friends, unfortunately, like all good things, this one must come to an end as well. We don't have a limited amount of time. And I want to take this opportunity again to thank each of you for sharing your work here with us. It was such an enriching experience for me to listen to these presentations over the past 2 days. Also emotional, which I wasn't expecting, but Simone certainly took me to that level where I, man, this is important work. I got to stick with it. Just in case I was thinking of stepping away, that did it. That was the moment. And each of you really inspired me over these past 2 days. And I'm incredibly grateful that I had a chance to get to meet you all. And I want to close by thanking Lucia and Liliana for bringing us together. It's been an effort over several months to bring these two groups of people together, and we appreciate everything that you have done. So thank you both so very much. And I suspect you're going to be here with us for a very long time, and I'm looking forward to working with you in the future as well. So thank you both so much. To our panelists, thank you again. I don't see my colleague Sylvia here, but I'm sure when I speak, I'm sharing his sentiments as well. We're grateful for everything that you've done as conveners, Lucia and Liliana, and for the panelists, thank you for your wonderful work, and please continue to do what you're doing because the Jaguar needs it and the people who live around Jaguars need it as well. All the best. Over to Liliana.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to thank you, Anthony. I know you had to leave, but I really want to thank you for guiding us through today with and connecting all the speakers so elegantly with relevance. And yeah, you're very spontaneous, and that's nice to see, very refreshing the way you work. So I'm happy that after the several meetings that we had together with this big group, I remember the first ones were very like, everyone standing in their own research and language. I remember the different language that we started exploring. So I think today and yesterday was a big success to see how how this conversation is happening. I think we have very concrete things that we can do together. I remember Silvio saying, for example, that we as a conservationist, we have these national plans to protect a species. But in these plans, for example, even in Brazil, there is no anthropologist part of the National Jaguar Plan in Brazil. I was surprised. So many very concrete things we can start doing. Also in the field of field work and how we approach communities, we can use a lot of the instruments that anthropologists use. So I don't want to start again the conversation. I'm very happy. I don't know how to express it through Zoom. Zoom is sometimes very restricted for this, but I saw that Barbara opened a bar. Apparently this is possible also with Zoom. So if you want to continue, you can go there. Barbara is already celebrating. But for now,
to the bar.
Yeah, so you go with Barbara to the bar. There is a place where you can start, continue discussing. If you are listening to this and you think I will contribute and all want to stay connected, please, you have our email addresses. Write something to us and we'll make you part of the family. Thank you again to you all speakers. It was fantastic. You did an excellent job. All well prepared and professional. Applause to you. And yeah, goodbye for now.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you also to Monica for interpreting. Thank you to the RAI staff. We really appreciate your help.
Monica. That was one. All right. Take care, y'all. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Take care. Thank you.
The bar is online, people.